You know, looking at the numbers, polling has been remarkably steady throughout this campaign until Biden's shaky debate performance. A post-debate dip for Biden represents the biggest polling shift of the year, according to Cook's Political Report. They're recognized as one of America's top election forecasters. You can see the national numbers here. Their new Biden versus Trump national polling average has Trump ahead by about 3 points. And when it comes to the battleground states, this is where it gets interesting. Polling averages from the week before the debate have Biden behind in Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona, and it's within the margin of error in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Here to help walk us through the numbers is David Wasserman, senior editor and elections analyst at the Cook Political Report. David, it's good to meet you. I follow you online every time there's a big election in the United States because you're the guy who makes the call for me. So let's start with the top line drop if we can since the June 27th debate. There's not a lot of movement in the top line numbers, about 3 points, I think. Help us understand the significance of a move like that in a presidential race like this.
Yeah, so going from 46-46 to 47-44 Trump doesn't sound like a big shift, but it is the most drastic shift in the race we've seen all year, given how static this rematch has been. And what we've noticed is that it's disproportionately come out of Biden's percentage rather than adding on to Trump's percentage. We're seeing some Biden voters have second thoughts about supporting his candidacy and are moving into the undecided or perhaps third party column. He has a base enthusiasm problem. And this is what is driving the skittishness among congressional Democrats at the moment who are defecting from him by the hour. And we're likely to see more of them before the end of the day. And it's not just because of their concerns about his ability to perform his duties or defeat Donald Trump. It's also raw political calculus about what he will do to drag down the Democratic ticket potentially and hurt their chances in Senate and House races. And disproportionately, the defections from Biden among congressional Democrats are coming from those in swing districts who have more to be concerned about and more familiarity with what it takes to win over unaffiliated voters.
Right. I think the most recent congressman to say he needs to step down comes from Arizona, and this was a key state for him in his win last time. And the data has him behind in Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, which he won, and within the margin of error in that Midwest blue wall of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Well, walk me through these states, David, how critical these are for Joe Biden if he is going to win the presidency, and what the situation is now post-debate in those states.
That's right. And the pattern we've been seeing all year is that Biden has suffered more erosion relative to his performance in 2020 among young and non-white voters, particularly Black and Hispanic voters. And as a result, he's actually lost more ground in those Sun Belt battleground states of Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, all three of which we moved from the toss-up column into the lean Republican column yesterday. Where he's held up better is in some of the older, whiter states in the north, in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But in the wake of this debate, we've seen bad polling for Biden in those places as well. Wisconsin was pretty much tied on average before the debate. Now we've seen a couple of polls that suggest Trump has opened up a modest lead there. And in Pennsylvania, there have been 14 polls taken since March. Biden has not led a single one of those polls, and he was tied in one, but otherwise Trump has been up on average by 4 or 5 points. So it's a stretch to call that state a toss-up. And when you add it all together, Trump has a much more plausible route to 270 electoral votes. He's ahead in more than enough states to win the presidency today. So either something would have to dramatically change, or Democrats and Biden would have to hope that there's some systemic polling error that's underestimating support for him.
You say that there's a change being driven by independent voters, a lot of whom I think would have helped Joe Biden 4 years ago, correct? Right? So what's driving that change? I mean, and is there a credible path for Biden out of this based on these trends?
Well, Joe Biden has been an unpopular incumbent for quite some time, and that's the biggest difference versus 2020. Back in 2020, about 42% of voters had a favorable view of Trump, 55% unfavorable, but Biden was still narrowly above water in terms of his own personal favorability. That's no longer the case. And also, it's more difficult to generate enthusiasm among your base when you are the incumbent party. Anger is a more powerful motivator in American politics than love. And so when Trump was in the White House, Democrats were supercharged. Now that it's a referendum on on Biden and his fitness for office, but also his handling of the economy and the border, Democrats have been less successful in getting voters to focus on their dislike of Donald Trump. It also has hurt Democrats that there's only been one trial of the four sets of indictments that have been brought forward that will happen before the election. So there's limited time for Democrats to press their case. Another factor here is that Biden had most of these swing state airwaves to himself. He had an advertising and campaign war chest advantage for the first half of the year. Now the candidates are going to be at basically parity for the rest of the campaign. Trump's going to begin airing ads and making his case. That is adding to Democrats' sense, at least in Congress and in polling circles privately, that Biden is ill-equipped to win this race.
So, Dave, help me understand this. And I don't know if the polling, which you analyze so well, contains the answer. But, okay, Joe Biden's old. That happens to everybody. Donald Trump is also old, and he's a lot of other things, right? Convicted, charged, under indictment, civil cases against him, accused of what happened on January 6th. Why is it like this, that President Biden, with a good economy and a decent legislative record, is just unable to punch through against everything that Donald Trump presents?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, when it comes to the economy, it's complicated, right? Voters are making a side-by-side comparison of these two presidencies. And even if unemployment is at historic lows and inflation rates are coming down, things still cost more than they did under Trump's presidency. And people are paying higher interest rates. And that's causing a pinch that among many voters, particularly middle-income voters of all ethnicities, they are penalizing Biden and Democrats. Then there's a difference between the candidate's actual age and how they come across.
Yeah.
And voters are, from the debate onwards, they've been paying less attention to what President Biden is saying and more attention to whether he can simply get it across. And so Democrats have lacked a forceful communicator to capitalize on Trump's glaring flaws and weaknesses, which in a past era would disqualify just about any candidate.
So there's an appetite for change right now inside the Democratic ranks, and the hope is that change could raise the ceiling, but I guess the risk is that change could lower the floor. The most obvious change is Kamala Harris. I mean, what do the numbers show there about switching to the vice president as the top of the ticket? What would that do to this race going forward?
You know, a year ago, there was chatter among Democrats about replacing Kamala Harris on the ticket because she was less popular than Joe Biden. Now, of course, the conversation has turned towards replacing Joe Biden with Kamala Harris because Biden is unable to prosecute that case against Trump. And Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor who has been articulate when it comes to attacking Trump and forceful on the campaign trail. But she carries several liabilities. And they include, first and foremost, she is the second in command of this administration and carries the baggage associated with the Biden administration of the past 4 years on the economy and the border. In fact, she was appointed to lead that border portfolio, which has been Democrats' weakest issue in national polling. And in addition, she is to the left of Joe Biden on several issues. Remember when she was running for the nomination in 2020 and the candidates were asked, for example, whether they would support Medicare for all or to decriminalize illegal border crossings. And she was to the left of Biden on those questions. She's also from California. She doesn't have the Scranton roots that Joe Biden points to in campaigns in Pennsylvania. So these are all going to be challenges if she is a replacement nominee at the Democratic convention. But it's also going to be very difficult for other Democrats to dislodge her, given that she is the vice president and she's a history-making vice president.
Okay, I have one last question for you, Dave, because the focus is obviously on the race for the White House. That's the top line thing. The president is the most powerful job in the world. But the Democrats are so anxious, not just because of that, but because of the down ballot implications. The nightmare scenario for Democrats is they lose the White House, they lose control of the Senate, they retrench even further in the House, and we already know about the 6-3 Supreme Court they're dealing with. Is that what's in the cards right now with the current math that you're looking at? I mean, how bad is it for the Democrats down ballot?
That's right. And up until the debate, Democrats were pessimistic about their chances in the Senate, but they were fairly optimistic about their chances of winning back the House because they only need to pick up 4 House seats to get there. And there are a number of vulnerable Republicans in blue states like California and New York that are targets. Here's where the math has changed. You do have these independent voters for whom the idea of a check and balance on a Trump administration is appealing. And we're noticing that down ballot Democrats have been outperforming Biden in polls for quite some time. Now, Joe Biden is underperforming other Democrats by even more. But if there is a fatalism that sets in about the Democratic ticket, if people on the Democratic side just don't believe that they can win and become resigned to Trump becoming president again, then turnout could fall through the floor, particularly among young voters and African American voters. And if that were to happen, then it could sink all Democratic votes. And you'd be talking about potentially not only Republicans gaining a few seats in the House, but also potentially winning a large Senate majority. Because they only need to get to 51 for a majority, but if they get to 54 or 55 seats, then some of the moderate Republicans in the Senate would become marginalized, have less power, and Trump would have much more leeway to enact an agenda or to confirm some cabinet appointees who make people uncomfortable.
Yeah, it underscores the anxiety because the stakes are absolutely enormous. David Wasserman, senior editor and elections analyst at the Cook Political Report. Great stuff as always. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.